All right, let's talk about it. The book of Leviticus. For a lot of people, it's not one book in the Bible that's, well, kind of confusing and, if we're being honest, pretty easy to skip. But what if it's not just a dusty old list of rules? What if it's actually this incredible, brilliantly designed piece of theological architecture?
I mean, when you think of Leviticus, this is what pops into your head, right? All these strange prohibitions and rituals that feel totally alien to us today. They just seem so random, maybe even a little primitive. But that's exactly where we need to start digging.
So here's the big question we're going to tackle. Is Leviticus just some ancient, arbitrary rule book, or is it something way more profound? A carefully constructed system that was literally designed to help a fragile world survive.
To get our answer, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to understand the real problem that Leviticus was built to solve. And that problem is nothing less than cosmic chaos.
Now, what's so fascinating about this is that the key to unlocking Leviticus isn't actually in Leviticus. No, it's in the book that comes right before it, Genesis. You see, the laws only start to make sense when you understand what they were responding to.
So think back to Genesis. God creates this world of beautiful order built on really clear distinctions, right? Heaven and earth, life and death, the divine and the human. But then before the flood, that entire order just falls apart. The boundaries get all blurry, violence fills the earth, and creation itself starts to become unstable. It's a total systemic collapse.
And this is why the flood isn't just about punishment. The text actually frames it as an act of decreation. It's like God has to hit a partial reset button, using the waters to roll back the chaos just to keep the whole cosmic system from collapsing on itself. It's a radical containment measure.
But here's the really crucial point. The flood restrained the chaos, for sure, but it didn't cure the underlying problem, the human tendency towards it. So the world after the flood is still incredibly fragile. It's still at risk of tipping right back into disorder. And that is exactly where Leviticus steps in.
So, you could think of it like this. If the post-flood world is a dangerous highway clinging to the edge of a cliff, then Leviticus is the set of guardrails. It's a protective architecture designed to keep everything from flying off the edge all over again.
And this architecture, it's basically got three main parts. First, you've got the idea of holiness, which is all about maintaining that sacred order. Second, purity, which acts as a kind of chaos containment system. And third, you have sacrifice, which is like the ongoing maintenance that keeps the whole thing running. Now let's talk about holiness. We usually hear that word and think it means being morally perfect. But in Leviticus, it's more of a structural concept. To be holy means to be properly aligned with God's created order. You know, respecting those boundaries that got so messed up back in Genesis. It's a spatial idea before it's an ethical one.
And this table just makes it so clear. You have to understand the difference between impurity and sin. Sin is a moral failure, period. But impurity, that's a morally neutral state. Things like childbirth or touching a dead body. Those things make a person ritually impure, not sinful. The issue isn't guilt, it's the potential contamination of a sacred space.
I love this modern analogy for it. The purity system is like a sterile field in an operating room. It's not about judging the patient as bad or dirty. It's about protecting a critical, life-giving space from anything that could cause harm.
And that critical space was the tabernacle, the very place where God's presence was going to dwell. You see, God's holiness is described as this incredibly powerful, even lethal force if it's not approached correctly. So the whole system of priests and purity rules creates this buffer zone, this carefully controlled environment so that God could actually live among the people without just destroying them.
Okay, but here comes the twist in the story. This incredibly complex, divinely ordered system of guardrails, it was never meant to be the final solution. In a really strange way, it was actually built to show its own limitations.
Fast forward a few centuries, and you have the Apostle Paul looking back on this whole system, and he asks the big question, why then the law? His answer is just fascinating. He says it was a temporary fix, added because of transgressions, and it was only meant to be in place until this promised offspring, this future Redeemer, would come.
And those limitations are key. You see, the law could manage the consequences of sin. It could restrain chaos, but it couldn't fundamentally change human nature. It couldn't restore the life that was lost. Its function was custodial, like a guardian, but it wasn't curative. It was a management system, not a redemption plan.
You can see this so clearly in the sacrificial system itself. The very fact that the sacrifices had to be offered over and over and over again proved they weren't a permanent fix. right? I mean, if they were, you'd only have to do it once. The constant repetition itself points to the system's own inability to bring about a final resolution.
And that brings us to the powerful conclusion of this whole amazing blueprint. If the law was the temporary guardrail, what was it protecting? What was it pointing towards?
Here's the bottom line. Leviticus was never, ever meant to be the end of the story. It was a life support system. It was a divine intervention designed to keep the entire human story from completely flatlining while everyone waited for the real cure to arrive.
So here it is, the whole idea on one slide. The law, the system we see in Leviticus, its job is to restrain chaos. It puts up boundaries. It manages the problem. But it's the promise of a future restoration that ultimately restores life. Two totally different functions, but both are essential parts of the same epic story.
So how does our whole perspective shift when we stop seeing ancient laws, like the ones in Leviticus, as some arbitrary test of perfection, and start seeing them as a merciful guardrail designed to protect a very fragile world until the real restoration could begin? All of a sudden, it's not a confusing rulebook anymore. It's a story of cosmic preservation.